this is Jim Schaefer, executive producer and host of Rip Rap, the academic book television program. My guest today is Randall Baier. Today we'll be discussing the latest books that Rip Rap has received, including those on New York jazz, New Orleans floods, and internet reputations. Welcome to Rip Rap.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, thanks a lot. Oh, sorry, I interrupted,
no,
but it looks like you've got lots of topics to sort of grapple with, as
right.
usual.
Well, we have some unique ones. The first one is this book on Down in New Orleans, Reflections from a Drowned City by Billy Southern. And it's been fascinating that here's this huge tragedy from Hurricane Katrina. Millions of people having to find evacuated, many thousands of homes that were flooded and destroyed. And it seems like it's just been obliterated from now the national awareness, the national scene. And this book is trying to deal with that and bring it back, into consciousness. And the point is, it's still a very difficult area. I mean, the suffering hasn't gone away. The area really hasn't recovered. The jazz places have kind of come back, but still there's people who are living in their front yards with FEMA trailers and plastic plumbing pipe going into their houses.
Yeah.
So I thought it was an interesting attempt to talk about the consequences from the hurricane, the post-hurricane era. And I think that's one of the things that academic literature can do, is try to deal with, they're talking about how history repeats itself. That's what bothers me the most. If we forget what happened and what caused it, then we're doomed to have it happen again.
Yeah, I agree. The thing that has struck me this disaster season, which has been fires, at least in the United States, these fires that have been in San Diego. The FEMA response, now and this may be true, they are saying, look what we learned from Katrina. Now we can respond better and faster. But I wondered about this. Is there something slightly askew here that they can respond to San Diego in a way that they were unable or unwilling to respond during the Katrina disaster? Because very similar things are happening, although granted, with the fires, you have had days of warning. With Katrina, there was the warnings that got misplaced and misinterpreted, but you basically have one day and then bam, everything hit.
Well, but I think there's a very interesting point here. The differences in the economic well-being of the relative populations. The ones that have the money can go somewhere else.
Yes, and they
the ones that could
have
not, and that was also true in that area, but was not reported, is there were a lot of people that could not afford to go and didn't, and some of them got burned up because they tried to fight it out with this horrible fire. So the issue remains, and I think you've touched on a very significant issue. What do you do when you have a horrific natural disaster and the people who are affected by it cannot move, cannot evacuate, cannot respond?
They're really reliant on the infrastructure and support capabilities.
Oh, it was fascinating. I had trouble even watching the coverage of those fires in California. They were just horrific. But it seemed like the interest by the media, and it was very short-lived, and that there were supposedly 1 million people who had been evacuated, and you hear nothing about that. And that's within days.
Yeah.
Okay, on the next word.
On to the next one.
Yeah.
Right. And
There's
it's 1
more
million
news
people, more than
actually
the population from Katrina.
Right.
But that was virtually impossible for them to, as so it was claimed, because of infrastructure and...
I just thought that was fascinating. There's more talk now
lots of reasons.
Unrest in Turkey than there is of this horrific. So people were saying if there ever was hell, this would be it, where they're having fires. I did see some coverage on 60 Minutes where they're saying that these are mega fires.
Yeah.
These are not ordinary things, and it's rendering some of the forest land absolutely uninhabitable, unlivable, and they'll take centuries for someone to come back.
Yeah.
Because of the temperature they're burning at. The little film that I saw of this, you saw trees explode just from the heat.
Right.
So,
But you've touched on the media, and it's true. The media power now, the consolidation and our reliance on media, especially television, but mediated events is how we get, you know, the truth of our daily life, and it's not it's difficult to have interactions about it. Say in other ways, it's sort of a push technology. You listen and you're completely dependent on what you're being told in general. I mean, the population.
But it also has what I like about these books is that it's a more in-depth exploration.
Yeah.
It isn't just film at 11 or the CNN endless
loop,
silly
right,
loop playing over and over again.
Right.
I watched one report, which is why I have a lot of trouble with anyway. I watched one report and they had this thing where the fire was jumping over the firefighters, or one reporter was talking about how the garage had burned down, and you know, and then all of a sudden it's gone.
It's
and they're on to the next one.
ephemeral. It's ephemeral. And
You got some over on your.
Well, this is you mentioned reputations at the opening introduction. This is called The Future of Reputation: Gossip, Rumor, and Privacy on the Internet. And it's almost like in the cover the man is holding his head, this kind of bald head with an internet download symbol that's obviously something's downloaded, and it's almost as if he's saying, "Oh my God, I just hit the upload button, and what happens now?"
I heard a story about someone, and I think it's all so repeated in there, of someone that meant to send a personal message to a colleague, that they had a little special relationship on the side, and instead sent it to all the workers in the entire workplace.
Yes, yeah. This is more than just once. I mean, it probably meant the downfall, could potentially mean the downfall of that person.
Oh yeah, because it was
on the
like an
context.
instant crisis,
Right.
and there's no recalling it.
There's no recall.
And that's what I've told my students. It's eternal.
Yeah.
Once it's launched, you can't get it back.
I did this week. In fact, I sent out a little apology, and you see this on the internet a lot on discussion groups, where people will say, "Sorry, I didn't mean that to go to the group," and they're relatively innocent. They say, "Oh, everyone should. There's a conference. I want you to all to attend, but it goes to 10,000. It goes to more people than you intend it to be." No, I sent a thing about a movie that someone had sent me, and it was an independent movie, and they were trying to raise interest. And so I knew some people in New York and Boston where the movie was showing. So I created this draft message and said something like, "Well, I don't usually send these blurbs out to people unannounced, but think about this movie. It sounds really interesting." But I decided not to send it, and accidentally, I hit that. The computer actually automatically sent it because it was a draft, and somehow it said, "Do you want to send this draft?" And without realizing it, I said, "Okay." So it could be Baier. That's what this Daniel Solov. I can't remember the title of his other book, but we've reviewed another book by him, and it's on this. I think it's on similar issues with sort of technology and sort of the effects that technology have maybe inadvertently,
Well,
brought
there's
along.
these other cases, like the U.S. Assistant U.S. Attorney from Florida came up to the Detroit area to
Yes.
have sex with a 5-year-old
Right,
girl,
right.
thinking he was arranging this through the mother, who was
Yeah.
really a sheriff's deputy, and arrested him, and then the guy committed suicide. And I was talking about this with a student the other day, that there's this crossover that happens. What on earth was he thinking about? And there's this fascinating thing which this book discusses, that, okay, you have this illusion that it's a private correspondence.
Yes. Yeah.
This private moment. You can have these little things, nobody will know about it. Right. And so you've got teenagers posting things on MySpace and YouTube websites, thinking it's between them and their friends.
Yeah, it's timely because this is specifically on the internet. But if you look at something like that, there's a television show now that busts these perpetrators who try to have sex with young underage children, or children, and NBC News, it's a sting. And then there they are for the world to see. I actually questioned the ethics of the NBC. I don't think it, I'm not convinced that what they're doing is ethical, alone legal. But, you know, they have the cops buy in. And I'm certainly not excusing the perpetrators. But on another hand, cell phone technology, the way that people speak on cell phones now in public, giving up any sense of, you know, this like true confessions, and that the world can hear the results of their job interview, you know, how their relationship is going with their mother-in-law, and it's like,
well, see,
you can
I
just
think that
foment this.
We keep talking about
a
self and public
reputation.
discourse, and I think the sense, you know, it's like that old "have you no shame." How can you have shame if you're on, you know,
Yeah.
if you are public, if your self is a public
Yes.
space in the public discourse all the time.
Right.
And so I know I've heard the same thing. I've heard excruciatingly private conversations, and there's something about people on the cell phone that they talk louder.
They talk louder.
And so
Yeah,
I
and
was standing in the
They don't know the boundaries. It's
That's
like-
what I'm saying. Well, because they think it's private.
Yeah, yeah.
But
right.
they don't.
It's the
They don't
illusion.
remember that they're speaking louder and that they're in a public space. And I was in the line at the supermarket, and this woman was talking loudly, and I learned more about her personal life than I ever wanted to know. I had no interest
Yeah,
whatsoever.
TMI, right? Too much information.
Yeah.
But this is just, it's fascinating how these illusions create, and I think this is one of the core things he may be
Yeah.
dealing with here.
People think I'm in my office or my bedroom or
Right.
my home,
Right.
and I'm just typing on my computer, my laptop, or my desktop. Nobody needs to know about this.
It's an illusory technology,
Yeah.
like you say. You're absolutely
But
right.
there you are, big, bad, bold, beautiful, and it's there forever.
Yeah, yeah.
And the way they catch people, I saw a thing with Enron where they took the scandal, they took all the emails and diagrammed them into a composite to show who sent what to whom and when.
Right.
And it's absolutely fascinating.
That is fascinating.
There was, I don't know how many
The-
thousands of emails.
This network of
Because
people.
it was relevant, who knew what when,
Right,
and
right.
who was corresponding at what
Right.
point. in
It's
affecting
it's actually, I mean, I'm just interested in the topic because there are websites now on the internet. This is really about reputation and who you are in your public presence. There's one site called LinkedIn. It started out with a perfectly good idea. Do you have a network of, say, scholars or like-minded people who are interested in the same topic, let's say music, let's research, and who could potentially link you to other people because of this? You have a network of friends, your friend has a network of friends, so let's somehow find a way to put them together. And I joined too. You know, you get an invitation from a friend, and it's all in your sort of professional shtick, your education, where you're working, what your background is, what you're interested in research, and then it searches through their system for these words and starts showing you your relationship to different people based on your other people. So like ego, whatever, your number, you're at 0. And then let's say I'm friends with Jim Schaefer, so Schaefer's at level 1, and your friends are at level 2. So I connect to somebody at level 2 through you, and it gets diagrammed. It's quite fascinating, but at the same time, after a while, if you are talking about yourself and what you do and this and that, it's meant to discover similarities and common interests, but it also means you have to be able to open yourself up to inspection, in a sense. You know, it's kind of
and the
fascinating.
reputation factor is now, you know, as a constructed self, used to be composed of conversations and face-to-face meetings.
Yeah.
And then you also had correspondence, but not
Right.
everybody saw that correspondence.
Right.
So now the constructed public self is much more complex, and you don't even know who's aware of it. Some of my students talk about that before they'll date somebody, they're checking them out on the
Right.
internet.
Right. This is very
Who
common.
are they? What are their linkages? Employers are now
Yeah.
checking people out
Yeah.
on YouTube, MySpace, all these places. And if they get derogatory information, they never tell the person, but that can
it's
end it right
background,
there.
yeah. RateMyProfessors.com is in the
Yeah,
news
there's
right
another
now.
one. I mean, now it's being used and can be very vicious because
yeah.
you don't even know what happened.
It's having a great effect on the workplace. I mean, obviously, if you or I go and try to get a job interview, it's sort of like you have to cover your back now. I mean, you have to make sure that you don't have the same kind of privacy protection in a sense that
there's no
people are talking about you
that you don't even know about.
It's fascinating. Good, interesting book.
This is a book, Ending Slavery: How We Freed Today's Slaves by Kevin Bales. Is an interview that we're working on setting up. He's a scholar who looks at slavery on a global basis, and his first book, Disposable People, is something that we had interviewed him before, and it really is a must-read, that book and this one, because he's now the president of the Free the Slaves Committee, organization. It's the United States sister organization, Britain's Anti-Slavery International, and he's a professor emeritus at Roehampton University in London.
Yeah.
But I mean, when I did the first interview, I went around asking people if slavery still is.
That's what I was just going to ask you about.
And it's worse.
Yeah.
Much worse. So what
worse
I thought,
than what we consider our historical period of slavery.
27 million slaves, and everybody, to the person before and after the interview, and even now says, "Oh, you loosen up the definition." No, he didn't.
Well, it's an interesting play on the words, ending slavery. It could be interpreted to say how we ended slavery, or does it mean how we should approach ending slavery? And from what you've said, I assume
he's talking
it's
about
the latter.
extincting. Yeah. But it's fascinating to talk about this with people because of the misunderstandings. He also identified sex slaves in this country, United States, and it was, which is fascinating because people don't think of it, and still going on. And these are women who are brought to this country without the proper documentations. They're victimized because the instant threat is, well,
right, you'll be deported if you don't.
And there was this testimony
for us.
in Washington just recently by a woman who was brought here, had to work in a brothel right in Detroit area, and was just rescued out by it. So he's talking about how, about rescuing slaves and how to go about it. It's a global problem, has global reach. His feeling is that a lot of it has to do with globalization, and so his attempt to stop it would be to recognize it for what it is, and then to start, doing what he calls in the product chain, the linkages that produce the conveniences to do it.
So he looks at economic labor market,
right.
Global marketplace issues, how to supply labor for different economic patterns, I guess.
Here's something really fascinating. He quotes Frederick Douglass in 1847. "I know that victory is certain. I go back for the sake of my brethren. I go to suffer with them, to toil with them, to endure insult with them, to undergo outrage with them, to lift up my voice in their behalf." Then he compares that with the words by Salma Mint Salom, who escaped from slavery in the late 1990s.
Wow.
"The first time I tried to escape, they bound my wrists and ankles and tied me to a date tree in the middle of the family compound and left me there for a week. He cut my wrist with a razor so I bled terribly. I still have scars from my arms. To learn and to work and to learn things, to go to school, to talk with people I choose to talk to, these things are liberty to me." And so he's talking about the same. This is 200 years later.
Yes. Right.
And I think that it's really wonderful work. And he was talking about how do you measure this?
Right.
He's a serious scholar, and he's got.
I don't know if slavery is the right word, but family imprisonment.
Well, he's talking about communities. It has, it functions.
Right.
It's, one of my students, she was in an about to be married in Pakistan, and her brother helped her just escape from it. She was from the United States.
I see. Wow.
So he's talking about policy. They're talking about key changes as far as the the community. It's a community approach.
Yeah.
To really have it be effective. And so I think this is a wonderful thing to do. You've got one there that.
Well, right. It's certainly jumping topics. This is a new book that's come out on the big band scene in New York City, called Making the Scene, Contemporary New York City Big Band Jazz by Alex Stewart, who is a practicing musician and professor at University of Vermont. This is published by University of California Press. Looks at sort of some, I guess you'd say, music scenes that come out of big band jazz in the city, how big band jazz playing is actually a large network of musicians, and they get a lot of other gigs. So there's a kind of a social, there's an ethnography to this that he did. Not only is he a practicing musician, but he sort of looks at the networks that these musicians are pulling together, the cultural background. So there's not only playing in bands, but there's also the sharing that goes on, and other opportunities that develop by knowing people in these in different bands with you and different contexts. And it's really interesting about, I mean, you know, like, say, session musicians or gigging musicians, so to speak. They have to be able to understand so many different, good musicians understand so many different genres that they can play style, and they understand the culture that they're playing to. So there is a lot of back and forth, multiple talents. Then people can play big band, straight ahead jazz, like 30s jazz, you know, Basie, Miller, whatever. Or they can play Latin groups, or in smaller ensembles, different styles, Caribbean, African, whatever.
See, that's what fascinates me about this book, is I love these times when people really do your interest of ethnomusicology, where they dig down and look at the cultural networks, because that was true here in Motown in Detroit. There wasn't just there was the Funk Brothers, but they also played sessions. They played for solos. They went on concert tours, but there was this going back and forth between traditional jazz and then the Motown jazz. Mm-hmm. You know, not the Motown jazz, but the Motown music. Mm-hmm. And what was singular about Motown music, it had that sharpness. They had that, you know, because these were guys that people were playing together all the time, whether they were in sessions or whether in small groups, yeah, or they were doing recording. Yeah. Yeah. They knew the music, and so then they would adapt to whatever had to be done, and they knew each other. And I think that's something that people tend to forget. They go and they see a performance in a nightclub or a concert or something, but these are musicians that live their music.
Right. And as musicians do, they often, I guess any subculture has its own inner forms of communication. You know, language cultures have special words and whatnot, but the musicians, they know each other's styles.
Plus, there's migrations that occur. Like,
right,
people from Detroit would go to New York, and people from New York would come to Detroit. Yeah. Yeah. And so there was an infusion or a fusion process that was going on that was absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, this he's touching on a lot of interesting aspects. Like, just if we look through the table of contents here, he's talking about all women bands and the place of all women big bands. Avant-garde, the Sue Mingus band from the Mingus Big Band, New Directions in Jazz Composition, 3 portraits of composers and jazz leaders, Jazz and Clave, Latin big bands, and then a whole analysis of Wynton Marsalis and his impact on the new jazz orchestra, especially the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra. But he's had, because of the popularity of big band through him, I mean, through Marsalis, broadcasts from Lincoln Center, and his own orchestration, his impact on the Lincoln Center music output, what's been played at Lincoln Center. But it's actually had a wider effect in American jazz band repertoire and whatnot.
Well, I think it's been fascinating how it's, rippled out from
Right.
New York.
Right.
But
Also, he's looked at gigging and training, rehearsals, how people learn, how you grow into the scene, how you become, better at what you do, and also adapt to different groups, different forms of performance, and whatnot.
what fascinates me is absolutely not a faceless craft.
Yes.
I mean,
right.
each person has their idiom, has their style of playing. You know, I used to fascinate me. I read about Charlie Parker, the bird, and he had some issues with drugs and stuff. But the guy was such a musician; he could pick up any saxophone and make it sing. But it was singing in his inimitable style.
Yeah.
And there's other people that could play bass or something. You know when you hear that style that who's playing.
Yeah.
And
the
people in the jazz scene know each other, because they played so much with each other and pick it up.
That's a good point. In fact, in here, I can see in this particular chapter on the Vanguard Jazz Orchestra, he's talking about the works within the orchestra, the sections, the trumpet section, the trombone section, first trumpet, second trumpet, what their roles are, and in fact how orchestration happens, how the different composers and different arrangers orchestrate these well-known standard tunes, but depending on who is actually in the band, what they sort of know their likes, their strengths, their sound, so to speak. So it's really interesting. You've got.
Well, also fascinates me with the big band concept. You have the economies of. You have this just bigger organizations to deal with.
Yeah, you're dealing
just
with 20 people on a stand. 20 people on a stand.
Just putting it on.
Right,
I mean,
right.
just getting there, having your presentation all
Right.
together, having all the stands, the music stands.
Yeah, you've
on
got
the music.
The cover picture is fabulous. You're in this tight club, but you've got at least 20 people in this picture. Well, okay, 12. And just tables packed with music. I mean, they've got their lead sheets, just a pile of lead sheets here. And this is it. What interests me is the improvisational, what do you call it? Almost the oral transmission that happens even though there are these lead sheets, these scores that are there that are just basically chord progressions. They're not.
Yeah, they're
fully,
just the notes to self.
Basic melody, chords,
Yeah.
and then that's it. But then you have to know the repertoire. It's like anything else. That's just to get you started. Well, we had a nice series of several reflections here. I mean, we got some very nice topics to look at this time.
Thank you for being here,
Thanks.
Fred.
You're welcome.